Hey, shalom, guys, and welcome to another interview special. Today, I'm having Dr. Dustin Smith on the channel. So here, he currently serves as a New Testament scholar at Spartanburg Methodist College in South Carolina, USA. Dustin has authored or edited 6 books, including the 2024 volume, Wisdom Christology in the Gospel of John, The Son of God, 3 Views of the Identity of Jesus, The Paradoxical Conquering of the Apocalypse of John. Additionally, he is the co-editor of the AI Critical New Testament and the translator of the Book of Psalms and the Book of Proverbs in the Revised English Version. Dustin has participated in 4 debates where he argued for biblical Unitarian understandings of God and Christ. He is also the weekly host of the Biblical Unitarian Podcast. So guys, please give it up for Dr. Dustin Smith. Dude, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Now, listen, on my channel, we argue the Trinity, but we also argue for the Torah. So a lot of my viewers are curious, when are you going to start observing Torah, be a Torah observer?
Well, I would say that I think it's important for us to observe the teachings of Jesus, and I think what the New Testament calls the Torah of Messiah. So I'm all pro-Torah and fulfilling the law. So we just will have to parse out a little bit as to what we actually mean by that. So the Hebrew Bible is very important to Jesus. And so I think that it should not be neglected. Old Testament does not mean old and outdated. So it's just the first of 2 testaments.
That's awesome. Perfect answer. Now, I do have to notice, I don't see any Hanukkahs behind you. And Dustin, I just got to tell you, man, at Hanukkah, it's like 8 Christmases. You know, it's a great holiday. You know,
it is. And Jesus participated it in John chapter 10. My camera only goes so far, so you can't even see stuff over here. So
that's true.
Just because you can't see it.
Well, very good. So part of the introduction, and we will get to this at the end, but guys, I wanted to show you, this is his brand new book, Wisdom Christology in the Gospel of John. And please stay until the end of the debate, because we will talk a little bit about this. And Dr. Dustin Smith, you will be back on for a book review of this fantastic thing right here. So, but everyone's here for questioning and to get to know you a little bit better. You are someone I have looked up to from the very beginning. When I really started to study the Bible and really try to separate myself from a lot of the doctrines, you were one of the first people that me personally I first found on biblicalunitarian.org, and everything made so much more sense. And it was a great feeling, because I personally felt alone, where I'm like, no one shares my views, and apparently I'm damned and going to hell because I believe in this. But it's like, wow, there are other people who believe in a Unitarian idea for God. You go back to the very beginning for the Jews, they also had a Unitarian view for God. And it was basically this thing that spiraled out of control. And it was just nice knowing I'm not alone. There are smarter people than me who are able to better explain what I was thinking. So, guys, please check out any books, writings, articles that Dr. Dustin Smith here has. So we're going to first get started with the questions. And the first one we're going to be talking about is, how did you become interested in theology?
That's an interesting question, and I think it motivates a lot of what I do right now. So I had grown up going to church every Sunday and every Wednesday, but we never really learned anything. We were entertained. We sang a lot of songs that sound like Jesus is my boyfriend, because, you know, it's romanticized that much. And when I go off to college, my first year of college, where I wasn't a biblical studies major, someone actually encouraged me to read the Bible. And I said, that's a great idea. No one's ever told me to do that. So I pick out what I think is the stuff that sounds relevant and important. So I just started reading the New Testament, and I'm shocked and surprised at all the things that I'm reading in there that I didn't already know. And I thought to myself, well, I had 2 thoughts. The first thought was like, well, look at how cool this is. But my second thought was, how come nobody told me this? How come I was lied to? You know, how come I was in church every Sunday and every Wednesday, and I think I was paying attention, but nobody told me about, about the kingdom of God and all sorts of other things. So The kind of person I was at that age is that I went and I confronted my pastor and my youth pastor, and I would say, what says this right here? And they said, well, that's not what we believe. I'm like, okay, what about this right here? That's not what we believe. Okay, what about this verse right here? And they said, that's not what we believe. And I learned very quickly that a lot of Christians don't actually believe what the Bible says. They believe whatever they've been told, or they believe whatever they have to believe in order to maintain a job. Okay, and that's between them and God. God will take care of all that on the day of judgment. But for me, I thought, if I'm going to be a Christian, I don't want to be hypocritical. I'm either going to take all of it seriously, or let's just not do this at all. So I learned that I needed to become more well informed, and so I kind of changed my majors. And my sophomore year, I got interested in theological studies. So it really just kind of came out of this realization that I'm finding out that there's a lot of stuff that's in here. I want to know for myself. And then I also felt that there are lots of other people out there that go to church every Sunday and they don't know what's in the Bible because they just don't have good teachers. They don't have good Sunday school teachers. They don't have people that just want to tell them the truth. And they need people to explain things to them in a way that makes sense. And I just wanted to contribute to being a part of the solution as opposed to just complaining about how bad the problem is.
That's awesome. That resonates with me personally because I remember singing that one song in church, and I remember driving home with my mom, where it was "The Holy Comes Riding on the Clouds." Days of Elijah, I think is the name of the song. Well, the bridge or the chorus, whatever, is "There's no God like Jehovah," and I'm like, whoa, who's Jehovah now? And it's like, oh, well, that's God. It's like, okay, well. As a little bit of a confusion, okay, I get that. And then what you were talking about is when you read the Bible for the first time, I remember reading Genesis. It was at the end of, I think, chapter 3 or chapter 4, about the flaming sword that's going back and forth all different ways with the two cherubs guarding. I never learned that, and that sounded fake. It sounded like it was like the Loch Ness Monster or something like that. Like you're reading, and I know I'm gonna irritate a lot of people by saying that, but it was weird. And then me personally, Daniel is my favorite book now. But there's not just the lines then. There's 12 chapters, so that means there's 11 other stories that are fantastic, but no pastor ever talks about it. And I feel like so many of us can just resonate with you because we've all done the same thing of we've gone to our pastor about this, and we have not gotten a good answer. To where me personally, I was escorted out by police by asking anti-Trinitarian ideas and questions to the pastor. So I think we all resonate with that. And you are, as you know, you're also part of that persecution of you wanted to know answers, but you were getting hate, and basically we don't believe in that. That's such a terrible response, especially when someone is in a position of power to do that to someone like you.
Yeah. And, just I think at some point people become adults and they need to take their own Christian religion into their own hands. They can't just do whatever their parents tell them to do. And they get to the point where they can start asking questions and develop critical thinking skills and reading for themselves. And that's why I like working in higher education, because I can help young students to develop those critical thinking skills so they can look at things and make sense of them and to ask questions, and I can point them in the right direction, because in reality, people need to learn how to interpret the Bible, not what actually is written in there, because anyone can sit there and read what's in there. But it's the old saying that if you give someone a fish, they eat for a day. If you teach them how to fish, then they eat for life. So that's pretty much what I try to do now for a living, is try to help people to understand the Bible.
And I think that's why so many people appreciate you, is you look at it from a mature standpoint. You're not going to teach something that is dogmatic. You're here to show what is in, whether we're looking at the Hebrew or the Greek or the Aramaic, what it actually says, and then you can go from there.
Yep.
I think so many of us who are fans of you really just appreciate the honesty, because we're at the point, you're right, we're all adults here. And if we're going to consider the Bible to be our holy book, we should at least read it if we're going to hold it to that type of authoritative position. So, Thank you so much. So my next question is, when did you realize that you wanted to pursue academically and to get a degree in theology?
Yeah, well, I learned that with simply an undergraduate degree in theology, you can't teach anywhere. I mean, you could teach in a church, and I tried doing some pastoral ministry for a while, but I really felt that um, during my first solo pastorate, I was also able to go and work on a master's degree, and so I was doing kind of the pastoral studies, through church work, but also I was doing kind of the academic side of things. I was doing my biblical languages and the exegesis and that stuff, and I enjoyed that. Like, you couldn't give me homework that would be frustrating. It was like, wow, I get to do this and it's fun. So I knew that my passion and that I resonated towards the academic side of studying the Bible as opposed to the pastoral side. And there's some people that are really gifted at the pastoral side that can do, the hospital visits and the funerals and the counseling and the weddings and stuff. Some people are really, really gifted at that. I'm not gifted at that, but I can work through the biblical languages, and I enjoy reading and studying and looking things up. And so I kind of quickly shifted towards the academic side of things, just kind of out of feeling like that's where my interests are. That's where my passion was. And so I just continued to go to school and get the degrees that I needed to get. And I just would go to any place that would hire me with these heretical views of saying that, God is one person, and that a singular pronoun means that God is one person, and, terrible, awful things like that. And luckily I've been able to find some success at having some employment so I can, support a family.
Right. No, yeah, that's one of the funniest things is I think a lot of us we're told that we're heretics, for believing this. And it's funny because when I get told I'm a heretic, I ask them if they own an English written Bible, because it was once deemed heresy by owning an English written Bible instead of a Latin one. So now what's your definition of heresy? Because by the church's own standards, which you originate from, you yourself are also a heretic. So when we come up with views like you said, like God is just one, he's echad, we're now heretics for believing, Yeah.
Heretic and Orthodox, they're just arbitrary terms. They don't mean anything. I'm more concerned with what is true and what is false. So, just because someone you think is a heretic, or if you're going to give that person that label, it doesn't mean when they say that 2 + 2 is 4 that they're wrong. They can say something that's truthful, even if you disagree with them theologically. So labels don't really mean anything to me. Let's talk in terms of what's true and what's not true. And also I want to kind of move forward in those conversations with a sense of humility that I don't have everything right. I don't have everything figured out. And there's a pretty good chance that something that I believe right now, I'm mistaken on. So, I want to hold my important doctrines lightly, and I want to be open to new evidence being brought before me. And I'm willing to change my mind. I'm willing to go in the direction of where the evidence is going. So if someone doesn't agree with me, give me a persuasive argument and I'll listen to you. I'll listen to what you have to say on that.
And I feel like a lot of us are in that boat of, if I'm wrong, I want to be shown why I'm wrong instead of being called a heretic or I'm damned to hell. Because that's not going to help the argument out at all. If I'm wrong, please show me why I'm wrong. I'm showing you a scripture. Please show me where the scripture is incorrect. And a lot of people, they just can't do it. That's heresy. We don't talk about it. Believe my way or you're going to hell. Yeah. That seems like it's the ultimatum that we're given.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I don't think that sort of language is convincing to younger people nowadays. They tend to already be a little skeptical of authority figures saying you need to do what I am telling you to do because I'm in charge. And that doesn't convince young people anymore. So they're more interested in, are you going to treat them well? Are you going to treat them as adults? And can you convince them with a good persuasive argument? So that's what I try to do.
Yeah, no, perfect. Now, going kind of with that whole heretical view, can you define exactly what is biblical Unitarianism and how does this differ from the normal Trinitarians?
Yeah, so biblical Unitarianism states that the one true God is only one person, and that one person is the Father alone. And biblical Unitarians would also have, at least those that take that particular label, would say that Jesus came into existence at his birth, and so that Jesus would be 100% human, a genuine human being in the same way that you and I are human beings. But he's also the Jewish Messiah, not also as in like tacked on. I mean, like that's like his most important role. And he lived and he died, and God raised him from the dead, and he's currently sitting at God's right hand. So that would be what biblical Unitarians believe about God and Jesus. I guess about in regard to the Spirit would be the presence and power of God that's operating in the lives of God's creation. It's kind of an extension of the Father, but it's not a separate conscious person alongside the Father. It's even Jesus says in Matthew's Gospel that it is the Spirit of your Father. It's the Father's Spirit. So now the resurrected Jesus kind of operates and helps pass out the Spirit, but that's just because he's been given all authority in heaven and on earth, and he's been highly exalted. So that would be what biblical Unitarians believe. Basically, it's just Unitarian, God is one person, the Father alone. Trinitarians would say that God is actually three persons, Father, Son, and Spirit, and those three persons are co-equal. They're co-essential, which means they're all made of the same essence. They're all made of the same stuff, and they are co-eternal. They have all been in existence forever, which doesn't make any sense because every single son, by definition, is younger than and derived from his father. That's just what the word son means in regard to a father. So how a son could be co-equal to the father, I don't know. So but those are pretty much the biggest differences there. Of course, as soon as you say that Jesus is, co-equal, co-eternal, and co-essential with the Father, then you have the problem with his humanity. And so it took, hundreds of years before they were able to develop the doctrine of the two natures. So it's kind of like, one problem knocks the dominoes over and you have to create another problem. So now Jesus is God and man. What that means, well, they can't really explain that to you very well, but it's not convincing. It's not persuasive. It's pretty incoherent. So the main thing is that this is just not what the early Christians believed. Like there are no Trinitarians in the first 3 centuries of Christian history.
Yeah, it's interesting because even, Tertullian coined the word back in, I think, like 160 or 170 CE. And then kind of like what you said, it has taken centuries for the idea to even come up. So what you're talking about with the dual nature and everything, the hypostatic union, that was at the Council of Chalcedon, I think in like 425 CE. So now we're talking, let's just say Jesus died in 30 CE, we're talking of roughly 400 years later. It is now the belief of the church that he had the dual, he's fully man, fully God, two natures, to where you're right. If this came up 400 years later, then the disciples did not believe this. Mary did not believe this. Paul did not believe this. No, like this is all later developments that all comes up. And it's basically, you believe this or you're going to die, essentially, what the church pushed.
Yeah, when you have to enforce your particular doctrine with threats and with the sword, then it's not persuasive by itself. It's like when and hopefully this doesn't upset your audience or whatever. But when you have to enforce COVID jabs with threats of being fired or being ostracized by the community, then people are not convinced that it's a good thing. So I'm always a little cautious when people have to threaten you in order for you to believe something. To me, I just think that's a big red flag. The two natures doctrine was in Chalcedon. I do believe that was 451. But still, okay. We're talking, over 400 years after the resurrection of Jesus. So, and it's not what the Jews expected in regard to the Messiah. They expected the Messiah to be a lineal biological descendant of David. So, and in order for you to be that, you have to be a human being. You can't be an angel, you can't be an archangel, and you can't be God himself.
And I think one thing that's always weird too with me is the coming Messiah has always been, predicted. You look at, the Talmud and the Midrash, and you'll see a lot of instances of it. And, there will be arguments that it was later written down, but these were oral things that were always talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But taking the second person of the Trinity away for a second, it's like, what about the third now? The Holy Spirit. He was never viewed as a person of God because, and Dr. Dustin Smith, correct me if I'm wrong. If the Holy Spirit was a person and was believed to be a person, that would make the early Jews a type of Binitarian, correct?
Yeah.
Essentially. And then Messiah comes in, and now we have the second person. So now we're Binitarians, now we're Trinitarians. But they were never even that.
Yeah, and it's just it doesn't work that way because like in Psalm 51, the psalmist says, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? And so the parallelism there indicates that the Spirit of God is just God's presence, but that the you're there, your spirit, your presence, that's a second person singular pronoun in reference to Yahweh. I know in the Messianic community, there's a difference of opinion on how to pronounce the divine name. We can talk about that later if we wanted to. But whoever the only true God is only a single person. And it's just, again, the Spirit is God's Spirit. It's God's presence. But it's not a separate person alongside God. I mean, the Spirit is never worshipped. There are no psalms to the Spirit. There are no early Christian hymns to the Spirit. Nobody sacrificed to the Spirit. Nobody prayed to the Spirit. I mean, it's just, if it was God in the same way the Father is God, nobody treated it that way. So I just, there's just no evidence for that. To me, I just think that's if I ever get into a Trinity debate again, that I would probably take the time to go and attack that first, because I feel like that's the weakest part of the Trinity.
Yeah, because it would just be obvious. They would not be a monotheistic Unitarian belief. Like Jews would not be. They would have to be Binitarians. Because the Spirit, the Ruach in Hebrew, it's mentioned all throughout the Tanakh, the Old Testament. It's all through there. But we never see it as, it's never spoken of as a person, as an individual. Like you said, it's the power. And I believe that's how the lexicon even defines it, as a force, a power, an energy.
Yeah.
It's just, but we see these at the ecumenical councils, these ideas changed and added to try to fit that square peg in the round hole. That's what they're trying to do.
Yep.
So
now,
going on, what are your top 3 scriptures or arguments that you feel support biblical Unitarianism?
Top 3. Number 1 is the fact that the God of the Bible is described with over 20,000 singular references, and a singular reference proves that someone is only one person. And so singular references would be singular pronouns: I, me, he, him, myself, yourself, himself. Singular verbs, because verbs in all 3 of the biblical languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, they're either singular or they're plural. If the subject is singular, then you know that if God is the subject of a verb, then that means God's only one person. So you have adjectives. Adjectives are also defined as singular, plural. And then pronominal suffixes. Those that know Hebrew and Aramaic know that it's his sheep. It'll be translated as the sheep of him. So if you take all those together, you have 20,000, over 20,000. I stopped counting at that point. Times to where God is described as only one person. I don't think there's any other doctrine that you can find that actually has more evidence than 20,000 occurrences. So that's one thing. The second thing is that, because anytime you're talking about God, you have to say something about Jesus. And for most people, like, Jesus is really kind of like the most important part of the conversation. But the New Testament's clear. Jesus came into existence. He was born. He was created. We have entire birth narratives and genealogies, and not just one gospel, but 2 gospels that indicate that Jesus was brought into existence. He had a genesis. And I think the third reason is the fact that we can see that the Trinity was a very slow development in history, and that there were no Trinitarians, until the middle of the 4th century. And even at that time, they didn't have a majority. There were still, even after all the councils, there were still churches of people that believed that God was the Father alone. So to me, I just think those pieces, it's hard for me to argue against all that evidence, but I would say if I'm having a quick conversation with somebody, those would be the top three things that I feel like are unarguable.
Oh yeah, thank you. And then regarding that, I feel like the top three arguments that Trinitarians make all the time are John 1:1, John 8:58, and John 10:30. I feel like that is the Trinitarian within the Trinitarian argument, and those three verses, obviously John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. The Word then became flesh, dwelt among us. That Word is Jesus. Jesus is called God. Jesus has to be God. Or John 8:58, he's called I am. In Exodus, he's called I am. That means Jesus is the same God in the Old Testament. Or 10:30, the Father and I are one, like one in the same. I feel like that's how Trinitarians read those verses, but what are those verses actually saying?
Yeah. Well, we could spend a long time talking about John 1, and in the book that you had pointed out, my Wisdom Christology book, I have an entire chapter just on John chapter, actually just on the prologue. And what I do is I walk through that really line by line and verse by verse, and what I try to demonstrate is that those readers who would be familiar with Jewish concepts of personified wisdom would see that there are so many parallels in the prologue. I actually count 20 of them. Things that are said about the Word in the prologue that were already being said about God's personified wisdom in Jewish literature, both biblical and extra biblical, although they probably wouldn't have thought about it in those particular terms, just Jewish wisdom speculation. So how do we do John 1? Okay, so in the beginning was the Word. I think because you have in the beginning in Greek enarche, excuse me, which is quoting the Septuagint of Genesis 1:1. He's drawing your attention to Genesis chapter 1. We have confirmation of that because as you keep going on in John's gospel, you have all things being made through the Word in verse 3. You have light and life in verse 4. So when you think, okay, I got something that's in the beginning with the Word, with creation, all creation being made by one God through a Word, creating life and light, obviously we're talking about Genesis chapter 1. I say obvious, but I know there are some people that still don't like that, but that's overwhelmingly what I think the evidence is pointing us towards. Okay, so when I look in Genesis chapter 1, what do we have? We have Genesis 1:3, Vayomer Elohim Yehi Or, and God said, "Let there be light." God's word speaks creation into existence, and you have this refrain, and God said, and God said, and God said. And so, what is the word that was in the beginning with God? Well, it's His creative and powerful speech. It's His utterance that brings things into existence, or it brings things from chaos and it puts them into order, brings order to chaos. Okay. And that word is not a second conscious person alongside God. It's just His own creative speech. It's part of who He is. Okay. So that's what in the beginning was the Word is. That Word was with God. It's not a typical way that we talk about things today, but in Jewish literature, we have several examples of God's personified Word being considered to be with Him. And also we have that parallel. We talked about wisdom. There are several parallels in which wisdom was with God. And from there, you're already starting to think of something like Proverbs chapter 8, where you have personified wisdom. And I actually think that John chapter 1, I would say John chapter 1 is the result of heavily meditating on two chapters of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1 and Proverbs chapter 8. Okay, Genesis chapter 1 has God's wisdom, God's word, His creative and powerful speech. And then Proverbs chapter 8, you have God's personified wisdom. And those two themes overlap in John's gospel, particularly in the prologue. Okay, so that's the word was with God. And the last little part there, we have a little bit of translational issue, ke theos logos. And the issue comes down to, and I go through all these details, by the way, in the book for those that want to chase up the footnotes. You have an issue to where you have a noun without a definite article connected to a noun with the definite article with the verb to be. Okay, and that grammatical construction means that the noun without the definite article is going to function adjectively. Okay, so which of those nouns? You have ke theos and God. Logos was the word. Okay, so God, theos, doesn't have the adjective, so it's going to function adjectively. So it's not and the word was God, as in their one-to-one equivalent, because he just said in the previous phrase that the word was with God. He just differentiated the two. And it seems very unlikely if the author is going to differentiate the two to say, oh, actually, now they're one and the same. That wouldn't make any sense. So it's much more likely that they're differentiated, but the word was fully expressive of God in the sense of God functioning adjectively as a way of describing the sort of descriptor or quality of the word. Okay, so that's John 1, I think. But the reality is,
real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, just for my audience too, because I know there's going to be a lot of Trinitarians watching this as well, and I just want to bring something up. There is a book called Greek Grammar by Daniel Wallace, and I mean, Dustin, you can agree that a lot of Trinitarians flock to what he says, and he says the same thing. He admits, and this drives me nuts too, because he's a Trinitarian, but then he admits in his book that yes, it is qualitative. It's not actually the same, because if it was the same, it would be Sabellianism. That's what he says. He says it would, if you had the same article there, but it's nominative and accusative. He brings that up. So he even admits that it's qualitative. It's not saying that what this is in John 1:1b is the same God in John 1:1c. So I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to say that real quick for a lot of the Trinitarians watching that, hey, your guy even admits, so you're not biased. That's all I wanted to show out real quick.
That's okay. Yeah, this is just a rule. And the reality is we have to interpret the grammar based on the rules that the grammarians tell us. So I don't get to make these things up. I'm just saying this is what the rule is. I'm applying it to this text, and it's going to indicate that. Something else to consider too is that you can look up the word in Hebrew, davar, over 1,400 times in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, and never once is davar a conscious person. Never once.
Yeah.
So the idea that the prologue could say, in the beginning was the word, and a reader at that time could think, oh, I know what this word is. It's a conscious person alongside Yahweh. There's just nothing in the Old Testament that would bring them to that conclusion. It's not there. But we have several instances to where God's word is personified, like Isaiah 55:11, where God says, I'm going to send forth my word from my mouth. It's not going to return to me without doing everything that I accomplished, without fulfilling the matter for which that I sent it. So there we have God sending his word. I mean, when you talk, you probably don't think that you're sending your word, but when you're personifying the word as an agent and you send the agent out, you can see that it's going to accomplish what you're asking it and you're telling it to do, especially if you're God and you know that your plans are always going to come to fruition. So, that's the sort of idea that's going on there, on top of the fact that we have the wisdom parallels as well. I wish there was more we could do with that. We could spend, 2 hours talking about John 1. And again, if people want the details, see chapter 3 in the book. Okay. So that's John 1:1. John 8:58, before Abraham was, I am he, ego eimi. You can't just say I am, it's I am he. Okay. So what has to be done here is that you have to look at the phrase I am or I am he in Jewish literature and see what options are available. Because I think a lot of people say, well, Yahweh claims to be I am in several passages, like in Exodus or Isaiah or Deuteronomy and the Septuagint. That's true. That's fine. But he's not the only person, okay? Because human beings could also say, I am he, if you understand the conversation and it's a normal way of referring to yourself. It's like, I'm the guy, I'm the one, I'm the person that we're clearly talking about. There's actually a place where David says ego eimi in the Septuagint of Chronicles, okay? He's not claiming to be God. He actually differentiates himself from God. And so, and there's lots of places actually in the Babylonian Talmud. We have lots of instances where famous Jewish rabbis will say the Hebrew equivalent, which is ani hu, which is how it's used in the Old Testament. I am he, ani hu. And so ani is the first person singular pronoun. Hu is the third person singular pronoun. So whenever someone says I am he, okay, first of all, only one person can say that, because whenever you say I, he, that's one person. Okay, so whoever this I am figure is, it's not a Trinitarian God. It's only one person. Okay, and so if you're saying in the Old Testament refers to the Father and the New Testament refers to Jesus, then you're now saying that Jesus is the Father. And I don't think Trinitarians really mean to say that, and I don't think most people want to do that as well. Okay, so I think what's going on there is that Jesus is claiming to be the Messiah, and that's what he's claiming. Now, that answers the I am he thing. Okay. But what about the before Abraham was? Okay. I do think that that is a reference to preexistence. However, preexistence needs to be qualified because there is not only one type of preexistence in the Jewish mindset. Okay. They felt that you could have important things and plans and purposes that preexist in God's mind, in his foreknowledge, and also you could have other things that literally preexist. And so the question is, what sort of preexistence are we talking about? Not simply, is this arguing for the preexistence of Jesus? And so when we look at passages like Acts chapter 2, verse 22, where it talks about Jesus being a man who, according to God's foreknowledge, was handed over according to God's predetermined plan, or 1 Peter 1:20, Jesus was foreknown before the foundation of the world, using the same verb proionosko, which is used actually of Christians earlier in that book in chapter 1, verse 2. And then, of course, in Revelation 13, verse 8, where it says that the Lamb was slaughtered from the foundation of the world. Obviously not literally, but he was slaughtered in God's plans and God's purposes. So the Jewish idea of pre-existing in God's mind, plans, and purposes is there in the New Testament. It's there in that awareness. And I think that's what Jesus is trying to say. He's trying to say this idea of the Messiah that you all have been looking for, I am he. I am the one. And, of course, they just got done saying, well, you're a Samaritan and you have a demon. And now he's claiming to be the Messiah. Yeah, that's blasphemous. Let's get our rocks. But Jesus runs away, okay, because he's mortal and he knows that if he gets hit by a rock, he's going to die, okay? He's not Superman, you know. Okay, so that's John 8:58. John 10:30, I think, is the easiest one. In the context, 10 verse 28, Jesus says, no one can take them out of the Father's hand. In 10:39, he says, what the Father has given me is greater than all, and no one can take them out of my hand. Okay, so no one can take them out of God's hand. No one can take them out of Christ's hand. Clearly, they are on the same page. And then he goes and he says, I and the Father are one. Okay. Now, in English, we don't have this because English is not a gendered language. But in Greek, the adjective for one could be masculine, it could be feminine, or it could be neuter. Okay. If it's masculine in this passage, I and the Father are one would mean that I and the Father are one person, one male person. If it was feminine, it would be I and the Father are one female person. It's neither of those things. It's actually neuter. I and the Father are one thing. Okay. And so what it means that we're on the same page. We're united. We are united in purpose. We're working on the same team. And he's indicating that what he is doing is actually what the Father is doing. But the problem is that most of Jesus' dialogue partners in the Gospel of John think that he is a false Messiah. And so for him to kind of link himself up to what the Father is doing is considered to be very, very blasphemous. But he's not claiming to be one person with the Father. It's a very simple grammatical point. Any freshman level Greek student could point out what I'm saying to you. It's really not controversial. And actually, this has been admitted by all commentaries on the Gospel of John. Like, you won't find the argument, John 10:30, of saying that Jesus and the Father are co-equal, co-eternal. That argument's been given up. Like, nobody's even saying that anymore. So there you have it. There you go. 3 verses.
So going back really quick to John 8:58, because I hear this all the time from Trinitarians on any type of debate. They will bring it back to Exodus 3:14. Now, the Hebrew is edyeh eshet edyeh. That's not the same translation as ego aim, right?
Yeah, so that's in Exodus 3:14. You have the ahiheh, asher, ahiheh, which means I will be what I will be. And if you read a few verses earlier in the context in the Hebrew, Moses is like, hey, you're going to send me, what am I going to tell them? And then God says, I will be with you. He actually uses the same ahiheh right there. And so he reveals his name in this sense as kind of a way of extending his promise. He just said, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to take care of you. And oh, by the way, that's the way that I'm going to describe my name. So he's not claiming to be I am, which in Hebrew is Anihu. Okay. He's saying, I will be what I will be. Now, to be fair, God does claim this title, I am, or I am he, in several other places, like I said, in Deuteronomy and all over Isaiah. So that is clear. But you can't make the connection in Exodus. So,
Right, because even in the Septuagint, he says ego eimi, but he says haon.
Yeah.
And then he says haon has sent me. Haon being the being. That is associated with Yod He Vav He, not the ego eimi.
Yeah.
Right?
And again, it's just the key thing to realize is that whoever is speaking in Exodus 3:14 is only one person. It's only one person.
Right.
Okay. It's inconsistent with the doctrine of the Trinity. Okay. And everyone knows I am he. Those singular pronouns. Okay. This is not something a triune God could say if it's not trying to contradict itself or himself or themself or whatever you want to say. So I don't think Jesus is claiming that. Jesus consistently distinguishes himself from God, especially in the context. And of course, in the Gospel of John, he claims that the Father is the only true God in John 17, verse 3. And so since we have, as I tried to indicate, several instances of human beings who can actually say, I am, or I am he, they can say ego eimi, or ani hu, or the Aramaic equivalent, and nobody picked up stones and said, oh, you're blaspheming, oh, you can't say that. Like, nobody said that. And these conversations are recorded in Jewish literature, both in the Septuagint, but also in the Talmud as well. Someone could say, I am he, and it wasn't blasphemous if you were just making a casual self-reference. But what Jesus meant is that I am the one you're talking about. I am the Messiah.
Right. The Christ, the anointed one. Because even with that, the blind man says it in John 9, Luke 2, Gabriel says it. Peter says it. Judas, the guy who betrays him, says it. Paul says it, I think, 4 times. It's like, but none of them were stoned or, accused of blasphemy. So this phrase is obviously very common.
Yeah.
But, again, people seem to only focus on that one part. Well, he said it in the Old Testament. God did to reference himself, but they ignore everything else. And it's just Christians just being either ignorant of the text or they're being disingenuous of the text.
Yeah. If that's the argument you're going to make, you have to make a convincing argument as to why we should connect those two figures. Okay.
Right.
So I just don't think it works.
Right. No, I agree. I 100% agree. And I like what you brought out of the neuter part in John 10:30 for being one echad. And I feel like it's the same thing. I'm married. You're married. A lot of us, we have spouses. And we are one. We are echad. We are united for the same goal. We work together. And it's interesting because whenever I hear the argument of John 10:30, I think of right away John 17:21. Father, let them be one just with us, just as you and I are one. So if we are one, if we are echad with the Father and the Son, does that also make us equivalent to the Father or to the Son? Do we have these awesome powers where we can create things out of nothing and everything like that?
I think those passages make it clear that this is a oneness of purpose. They are united. They're on the same page. They're on the same team. And again, it's just this is really not a controversial point. It's just it's a simple grammatical thing that someone studying Greek for 10 weeks should know and be able to clarify.
Right. So going on, because you mentioned a little bit of this, the pre-existence of Jesus, and you brought up kind of the different views of what that exactly means. So if you can go into more detail on that, and then also tie that into, I know a common view held today, especially by Jehovah's Witnesses, that Michael the Archangel became Jesus. But that was also a very early Protestant view, but then that was scrapped because of the whole Trinitarian doctrine. But even the whole angel of the Lord, is that a literal pre-existent Jesus? Can you go on, talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's
I know I threw a lot at you, so
yeah, you snuck 3 questions into one, and I'm trying to argue against that sort of thinking here. So, but you're the host; you can do what you want. Okay,
it's the Trinity. It's the 3 questions in one.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll answer them with one answer. Okay. So what I would encourage people to do, by the way, and a little bit of self-service, is that on my channel, Biblical Unitarian Podcast, I have several episodes dedicated to Jewish preexistence, and we can go through the Mishnah and the Babylonian Talmud, and we can see the sort of way that Jews would talk about this. Also, in another document called Bereshit Rabbah, where they will say that 6 things existed before the creation of the heavens and the earth. Some of them actually existed, and some of them only existed in God's plans. And the Messiah is listed among that group of 6. And what we can actually do, I mean, you have to, I don't know exactly which episode it would be, but in these documents where they talk about how Jewish preexistence could be either literal preexistence or in God's plans, when they talk about the Messiah, they actually say the Messiah was in God's plans. So they talk about them and they put the Messiah there in God's plans, in the same place where they put the patriarchs and any other human being. That's just kind of how it all works. So you would use that little search, the magnifying glass, not that one on the top. That's going to search like all podcasts. The one on the top right.
There we go.
Yeah, I would just type in like preexistence or whatever. So, but again, the key thing is to see, at what point did Jesus actually come into existence? And the New Testament writers will actually tell us that. They'll tell us that happens, at Jesus' conception, at the point when he is miraculously created by the Holy Spirit. And again, you could look at that, in Matthew 1:18, 1:20, Luke 1:35, and a variety of other places where it indicates that sort of language. Okay. Let's talk about the angel of the Lord. Okay. So the angel of the Lord is, by the way, people should know that the word angel just means messenger. Okay. So he's just a messenger of the Lord. I do think he is a heavenly angelic messenger. This is the angel of the Lord, by the way, because there are human messengers. We have a book in the Hebrew Bible called Malachi, which means my messenger. Clearly he's a Hebrew messenger. That sort of thing. So the angel of the Lord functions as an agent of God, because that's what messengers do. When God sends forth an agent, that agent fully represents God in every possible way. God, the sender, is going to invest his authority, his privileges, his prerogatives, and even his own name and titles into his messengers. And so this is why you'll see these examples in Genesis and in Joshua and Judges, where someone will encounter the angel of the Lord, the Malach Yahweh, and it'll sound like the angel of the Lord is just talking in the first person as if he is Yahweh. But that's exactly what you would expect from a qualified agent. And you would never confuse an agent for the sender. Okay. If I ordered Will some pizza, and they deliver it to your door, and you said, "Who is it?" And they said, "Papa John's." And you open the door, and it's a guy with a name tag that says Steve. Yeah, he said he's Papa John's, but he's not. His name's Steve. Okay, but we don't think there's a confusion there, because even though he can call himself Papa John, and when you write a check out, and people still do that these days, you would write it out to Papa John's, not to Steve, because he represents Papa John's as their agent. He can speak on their behalf. He represents them. If you don't pay them, you didn't pay Papa John's. But he can even introduce himself and say, "I'm Papa John's." We understand this in our culture. But you would never confuse and collapse Steve, the delivery guy, with Papa John's, the guy of semi-average pizza. Okay? You would never collapse them and confuse them. In the same way, in the New Testament, it's always God sending the Son. You don't confuse them as if the agent is now confused with the sender. In the Gospel of John in particular, the relationship between God and Jesus is in terms of Jesus is the one who has been sent by God, and God rarely gets described in any other way other than the one who has sent Jesus. Over 40 times that relationship is described. God is the sender, Jesus is the agent. Another word for agent would be apostle, which appears hidden in the Greek text in John chapter 13, but it's also there in Hebrews chapter 3. So we know an apostle, that's related to the verb apostello, which means to send. And that's because in Hebrew, the verb shalach, which means to send, gets brought out into its noun form, the shaliach, the one who is sent. So that's kind of the Jewish principle of agency that we have there. I know we kind of moved on from angels and stuff like that. The key thing, though, is Jesus, the son of David, the son of Abraham, an angel, as in a heavenly angelic being? I don't think so, because in the birth narratives, they never say that. They never say an angel came down and became human. That's just not there, because then Jesus is man and angel, it just doesn't work that way. I mean, you can't be a descendant of David and also be Michael the archangel that was around before David. It doesn't work that way. Hebrews chapter 1 is quite clear that Jesus is not an angel. That's part. It goes through from verses like 5 through 14, and it contrasts things about angels and things about the Son. That argument only makes sense if the author believes that Jesus is not an angel. Jesus never says, "I am Michael." That much is clear. Okay, how about that? It just doesn't work. For the Jehovah's Witnesses, they actually think that when Jesus was raised from the dead, he was raised as a spiritual person, that he's no longer human. But in Luke's gospel, Jesus says, "Touch me, put your hands on me, flesh and bones, or a ghost does not have flesh and bones like I have." As a resurrected person, he still is someone who has those sort of things. And Jesus currently right now is a human being, according to 1 Timothy 2:5. And when he returns, he's going to be a human being, according to Acts chapter 17, verse 31, and a variety of other passages. So there's like 1,000 reasons why, I'm exaggerating there, why Jesus can't be a heavenly angel, or more specifically, Michael the archangel. The point is, he's called a human being. He's a descendant of human beings. The genealogies make it clear he's an actual, genuine member of the human race. And as a human being, as the Son of Man, he died on behalf of other human beings, which is exactly what you would expect a royal kingly figure who represents his people to do. So that's my short answer.
Yeah.
To 3 questions.
No, that's awesome. No, I appreciate that. And I feel like even if Jesus is the angel of the Lord, and I actually had a debate regarding this last year, I want to say, or maybe it was late 2022 or whatever. Part of the argument that I look at is when we look at the parable of Mark 12 and Matthew 21, the parable of the vineyard, where God plants a vineyard and he lends out to people. He sends his son after the last prophet, right? His son is sent after. So let's say Jesus is the angel of the Lord, and was it Exodus 3, where the whole burning bush thing, the angel of the Lord started. Let's just say that's Jesus. Well, then Jesus was sent before the last prophet, and he spoke before the last prophet. And then even in Hebrews, I think it's chapter 1, verse 2, where it says, in the old days, God sent his messengers to speak to us. But in these last days, he sent his son, right?
Yeah.
So if the whole angel of the Lord is some pre-existing Christ, which, sure, I think a lot of people get confused because they can draw a lot of similarities, right? But at the same time, too, that because the angel of the Lord is unnamed, they'll try to say, "Oh, well, that was the whole Jesus before it was actually Jesus," and they'll try to add in this superstition, like, "Oh, this really cool thing happened," but they try to force it there that actually is not.
Yeah.
Try to make something out of nothing, which is kind of unfortunate.
Yeah. I could say I'm pretty confident, Will, that you did not shoot JFK. How am I confident of that? Because you weren't alive then. Okay? I don't know who did it. I don't know the person's name, but I know it wasn't you because you weren't alive at that point. I wasn't alive either. Okay? The angel couldn't be Jesus. That's one reason, because he was brought into existence at a particular moment, and the gospel writers and the writers of the New Testament clearly detail that out in a way that we can't just explain away.
Yeah. And I think people just become obsessed with the typology, and they try to apply everything. But I mean, even throughout Scripture, we can apply a typology to how Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, right? He was thrown into the pit, and then he rose to Pharaoh's right hand, where he received power and dominion. We can say the same thing about Christ. He was betrayed by his brothers. He was in the grave for 3 days, 3 nights. He rose up to be at the Father's right hand.
Yeah.
But Joseph was still a real person. We can draw a typology there. But for us to then say Joseph never existed, that was a pre-human Christ, that's insane. Almost like the whole Melchizedek thing, where Melchizedek is actually secretly Jesus because he's a king and a priest, and he disappears from the story. So he has to be it just because. We can draw some similarities. That's a very poor argument, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah, similarities don't prove identity. You and I are both males with short hair and a button-up shirt and books in our background. We're not the same person, because all it takes is one difference to blow that argument out of the water, and there are 100 differences between them. So,
right. Now, one of the speaking of differences and similarities, here's an argument that I feel like a lot of Trinitarians make. And out of all the Trinitarian arguments, I feel like this is probably the better ones, right? I feel like John 1:1, John 10:30, John 58, those are so easily dismissed, right?
mm-hmm.
But there are some, there are better. I'll say that there are better, and I think you can agree with me on that. There are better arguments to make than those. One of them being, we'll go to the Book of Revelation. Yeah. Where it says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the first and the last. Now, is Jesus actually saying these titles? Is it the angel who was sent saying these titles? Is it the Father saying, like, who exactly is speaking within the context of this?
Yeah, so these have troubled Unitarians for a while, because it does seem on the surface as if Jesus is claiming these titles that the Almighty claimed earlier in the book in chapter 1, verse 8. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I kind of, let's start with those references. Okay. When you say, I am the first and the last, or I am the Alpha and the Omega, again, the person speaking is only one person. Okay. That person is God. It's going to be the Father. Okay, because in the book of Revelation, the relationship between God and the Lamb is the relationship between a father and a son. Because when Jesus describes the Father in Revelation chapter 3, he'll say that he is my God, and he'll say that he is my Father. Okay, so that much is clear. So what we tend to have here is what I think is another example of God sharing his titles, his privileges, and his prerogatives with the highly exalted, resurrected Jesus, the one who has conquered and the one who has overcome. Okay, and you'll notice that the most exalted things that are said about Jesus in the Bible are after his resurrection. It's an interesting point. It's after his exaltation. It's after the fact that he's been highly exalted. And if you're going to say that this title that is, I do think it is given to Jesus. I think the reason why people don't want it that way is because they don't want to acknowledge that. They try to find a way to say, well, who's talking, who's there? Can we pin it onto an angel? The problem there is that at least if it's given to two persons, you have something that's going on here. Okay. But we already know that Jesus is someone who bears the authority of God. We know that according to Philippians 2:9-11, that God highly exalted Jesus and gave to Jesus the name that is above every name. Or every other name, excuse me. So Jesus bears, God's own name and his own authority. We know at the resurrection, according to Matthew 28:18, that all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. He's got all authority, but who gave it to him? Well, God did. Okay. We know there's still a subservient relationship, because in Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, it talks about the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him. Okay, so right. Jesus is still subordinate to the one God, and they're clearly distinguished there. So let me actually, everything I've been doing so far, I've been doing off the top of my head. So let me actually pull up the text here and and make sure that I get these references for some people, because we don't do enough with this particular passage. I did my doctoral dissertation on Revelation, so I know a little bit. I know enough to get me in trouble. Let's put it that way.
If you want to, I can pull it up on the. I can share the screen. Is it Revelation 1?
Let's do that. No. I want you to go to Revelation 2:26, and then we'll just kind of start from there.
Okay. Let me share the screen.
That's in the New Testament.
All right, so 2:26, you said.
Yeah. So,
and this is from
okay.
NASB.
Right. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. The one who overcomes, bad translation, the one who is conquering, and the one who keeps my deeds until the end, I will give him authority over the nations. He shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of the potter are shattered, as I also have received authority from my Father. Okay, so you see what's going on there? Jesus says, if you conquer and you overcome and you keep my deeds until the end, then I'm going to give you authority over the nations. But guess what? The Father has given that authority to me as well. Okay.
Mhm.
So Jesus only has that because it is derived from the Father. Okay. And go down to chapter 3, verse 21. This is the last promise that's made in Laodicea. The one who overcomes, again, the one who is conquering, I will grant to him to sit with me on my throne as I conquered, as I overcame, and sat with my Father on his throne. Okay. Now, if you think of Revelation as a book of images, I know we tend to think throne means chair. Okay. And it does. But what does the image of a throne mean? The image of a throne means dominion, authority, kingship. And when Jesus is saying here that he's sitting on the Father's throne, it doesn't mean that there are two guys sitting in one chair. Okay, it means that Jesus is sharing in God's rule and God's dominion. That would be how the imagery would actually work. But notice that Jesus is now saying that he's going to share that also with his disciples. But you can see here, what Jesus is indicating is that everything that he has that he wants to give to his faithful followers is something that he has received from God. He has the authority from God. He has the dominion from God. He has the kingship from God. And this is just openly admitted by Jesus himself in these passages. And so when we see Jesus bearing a title of God, the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, that God already has, you can say, okay, I see this. This is consistent with the theology we have in Revelation, to where Jesus is someone who is highly empowered, highly authorized, and the bearer of God's titles and prerogatives. And if that wasn't enough, you can go back to chapter 1, where Jesus actually claims to be the first and the last. I think this is when he reveals himself to John, probably around verse like 14 or something. This is in chapter 1. Let's see. There you go. Actually, down 17 and 18. When I saw him, this is when John the Revelator saw Jesus, I fell at his feet like a dead man. He placed his right hand on me, saying, don't be afraid. I am the first and the last and the living one, and I was dead. Okay, well, God can't say that. He's like, yeah, I'm the first and the last, but I was the one who died. And behold, I am alive forevermore. So, yeah, he's claiming that title that he rightfully has as the highly exalted representative of God. But he also makes sure to not confuse himself with the one seated upon the throne, because he's the one who actually died, to where the the one seated upon the throne is the one who lives forever and ever, and the one who's eternal, and also the one who created all things. So that would be what I would do. Like what I'm doing there is I'm interpreting this in light of wider New Testament theology, to where the Messiah, in his highly exalted state, has been given the name that's above every name, and has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. And I'm interpreting it in light of the theology of the Book of Revelation, where Jesus himself admits that his authority, his power, his dominion, and his kingship is derived from the Father, that he received after he himself conquered. Notice, after he was, killed as a martyr and raised from the dead. So that would be my answer to the question. I do think that the references in chapter 22 do refer to Jesus, but this is what it actually means when they're put on Jesus.
Right. Because, here's one I kind of want your opinion on. Because it's hard with Revelation. I'm trying to find the exact verse. But it says that these are signs and symbols of things to come, right? In Revelation. So obviously there's not going to be a giant animal that comes out of the ground or out of the river or the waters, that's actually going to really, do anything. Here.
I think you're thinking of chapter 1, verse 3.
Is it verse 3? Okay. And then, so here's Revelation 22. Now, I'm going to start at verse 8. I, John, am the one who heard and saw these things. And when I heard and saw them, I fell down to worship at the feet of the angel, the messenger, Angelos, who showed me these things. And he said to me, do not do that. I am a fellow servant of yours and of your brothers, the prophets, and those who keep the word of this gospel, of this book, worship God. And he said to me, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of the book this year, prophecy of this book, for the time is near. Let the one who does wrong still do wrong, and the one who is filthy still being filthy, and let the one who is righteous still practice righteousness, and the one who is still holy keep himself holy. All right, so we know that the angel here not God, not Jesus, the angel, is speaking. Verse 12 then. Behold, I'm coming quickly. My reward is with me to reward each one as to his works deserves. I'm the Alpha and the Omega, and the first and the last, the beginning and the end. So when we read verse 8 through 13 in context, it's the angel that's speaking here, right?
It sounds that way, except for this little part here at the end. Chapter 17 through 22:9 is its own little section, and then verses 10 through the rest of it's considered to be the closing, because the one who actually comes quickly and brings the reward in Revelation consistently is Jesus, and he does say in verse 16, "I, Jesus, have sent my angel to testify to these things." So if you take it to be the angel, I think what you're doing is I think people are they're seeing what is there needs to be a line that is shifting the final vision from kind of the conclusion of the actual letter, and I can see how they do that. The problem is that there's a very clear abrupt change to Jesus there, and the question is, okay, well, if you know that it goes at some point to Jesus, where do you draw the line? So you kind of have to look at a much bigger picture of how it works, because how do you quickly do this? Okay, so from chapter 17 through like 19:10 is the vision of fallen Babylon. It's introduced by an angel who says, "Come, I'm going to show you this woman figure," and this woman figure is a harlot. And at the very, very end of it, you have the same sort of language at the middle of chapter 19, where he falls on his feet and he says, "Don't worship me, worship God." And then you have the vision of New Jerusalem, which is also a woman, in chapter 21:9 through 10. I can't believe I know this off the top of my head, where he's like, "Hey, come and I'll show you the bride." He shows you another woman. He shows you a good woman. And at the end of that vision, it has the same thing. He falls at the feet of the angel, and he says, "Don't worship me, worship God." So that's part of a much bigger section that has to be read in the context of everything going on from chapter 17 through 22:10, I believe. And so that larger argument, which is actually the biggest argument in Revelation, that has to take precedence over this little piece right here. And it just seems, again, this is just a typical closing of a letter. It's a typical epistolary conclusion. And so, again, if you want to say it refers to an angel, then you still have that title being given to someone other than God, and you still have the same problem. So I just think that my solution has fewer issues with the whole thing. So,
oh no, yeah, I'm not arguing. So the reason why I just bring this up is I hear too many, this is Jesus speaking. But if we're going to remain in context, and yes, we have the law of agency here, everything like that. Where yes, I would agree with you that behold, I'm coming quickly. My reward is with me. That is Jesus speaking. I think when I deal with a lot of Trinitarians, and I feel like a lot of people, who are Unitarian that deal with Trinitarians deal with this too, is their argument is keep everything in context. And it's like, okay, well, if we're going to keep it all in context here, it sure sounds like the angel, the Malach, that can't receive worship is now the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. You know what I mean? So like, where do we then draw this line? Where I agree with you, but the whole Jesus is God because he says this, it's like, well, the angel, though, who does not receive worship, he could be saying this on behalf of Jesus. Because in verse 16, I've sent my angel to testify.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, and the reality is people need to realize that an angel, or an agent, a shaliach, someone who represents the sender, bears all of the titles of the sender without being confused with the sender. So this is why I think that there are two places in the New Testament where I do think Jesus is called God, but I think God functions as a title in the same way that Moses was called God, the judges were called God, and the Israelite Israelite king. The Israelite king was called God twice. So it's God functioning as a title, as someone who represents God as an agent.
And even as that God is a title, that can obviously, like you just mentioned, it can be given to anyone. But it's interesting because in Deuteronomy, Joshua, Psalms, and in Daniel, it acknowledges that Yod-Heh Vav-Heh is the God of gods. 1 Corinthians 8, 5, and 6. There's many gods, but to us there's only one God, the Father.
Yeah.
Makes it very clear. So, but thank you for that. My final question, and to wrap it up today, is on my channel, we talk about a lot of Jewish things. So during your studies, what insights, knowledge, or appreciations have you gained from Judaism or any of the rabbis?
I think, the rabbis in particular, and I have I've read through the Mishnah twice, and I've read through the Babylonian Talmud once, and I have quite a few Jewish works. I think people would appreciate my attention to that sort of stuff there, because it's part of the context of creating the New Testament. Is
Absolutely.
that they can read Hebrew and Aramaic very well, better than all of us can. I mean, my Aramaic's not great. I mean, I could translate through Daniel, but they could sit there and they can see the references to God. They know that there are singular references. They know that God is one, and they just see it over and over and over again. And they don't have to convince each other of that. It's so obvious. It's so clear because they could just see it in the languages. So I think one of the things that I've found is that there's an appreciation for the details in the languages. And for the most part, let's be honest, like our English translations of the Bible, they're 98% fine. The parts that are different, I mean, yeah, I don't think people are being deceptive. I just think, there are just different ways of interpreting certain passages. But I appreciate the Jewish approach to understanding God, and the fact that God is holy and God is a single person, and God is kind of like this holy other. But he's not so far apart that he's kind of like this absentee landlord thing. He's close, and he relates to his people, and he's related to his people through a variety of agents, originally through Adam, made in the image of God, and through prophets and priests, and through kings. And Jesus kind of like happens to function as really all of those things. He is the new image of God. He is the prophet from Deuteronomy 18. He is the priest according to Psalm 110 verse 4. And of course he is the Messiah, the Christ, the anointed one. And so he helps us to, I think, mediate the one God, but he does it precisely as a human person, as a member of the human race. And I can relate to that as a human being. So that's kind of, I think, something that I appreciate. Is that's kind of really two things. It's the oneness of God that the Jews obviously grabbed hold of because it's such a simple and easy point. And then the principle of agency, which to me is like, if I didn't have the principle of agency, I wouldn't know how to interpret the Bible. I just wouldn't know how to make sense of the things that are in it. But it's just the writers of the Bible assume the principle of agency, and they portray these relationships between a sender and an agent without explaining them to you, because they assume it's common knowledge.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the whole idea of shaliach, agency, is so important. I will explain this to Christians and they'll have no idea what I'm talking about. And I'll read them verses like Exodus 7, I think it's 17 and 18, where this is how you will know that I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. But the staff is in my hand, I will strike the Nile River. So I asked them, who's going to do this? Oh, well, God said he's going to do this. I'm like, right. But then when we read on, Moses tells Aaron to do it. Yep. Or in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 3, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh tells Isaiah, go and speak to King Ahaz, say this to him. I think it's verse 6 through 9. He goes to him, says all these things. And then in verse 10, it says, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh continued to speak to Ahaz.
Yeah.
So is Isaiah Ahaz now? Is Isaiah the fourth person of this Godhead that's now being invented? No, it's simply agency. But I feel like if a lot of people really understood agency, which is a concept that a lot of Western people don't understand, reading the New Testament would bring a lot to life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Well, those are all the questions I have for you today, but you will be back on my channel. Guys, this book right here, Wisdom Christology and the Gospel of John, I do have to say, Dr. Dustin Smith, this is a little misleading, because he doesn't just go over the Christology in the Gospel of John. He goes over the entire Tanakh. He goes into apocryphal writings. He goes into the entire New Testament. What Dr. Dustin Smith here does is he dissects the word Sophia. He looks at the Christology through the entire thing. I'm halfway done with this book, and I have to take breaks when I read this because there is so much information here. And guys, let me just tell you, I'm not just saying this because he's here. I'm very honest, and I'm a blue collar worker. Everyone who knows my channel, I'm a blue collar worker. I'm very blunt and honest, and I don't care if I'm going to hurt someone's feeling. This is a fantastic book. So, this is just, I can't stop saying enough good things about this book. And what's hard is, Dr. Dustin Smith, we both have bookshelves. And now, you'll probably agree with me on this. There are a lot of bad apologetics or a bad commentaries concerning the Bible from a Christian standpoint. They're just bad. And it really is frustrating because you don't know which books to buy. And guys, seriously, this book, Wisdom Christology, in the Book of John, is absolutely fantastic. This is such a detailed book. I'm so excited to finish this. I'm going to bring you back on to do a book review on this. But this is something, guys, you need to run out and get. Dr. Dustin Smith, is there anything that you want to say regarding this book?
So I did not prompt Will to say any of that stuff, and that was not a paid sponsorship or anything. So that's just him. That's him being honest. And the only thing that I would say is that the book is my attempt at trying to get the Christology correct in the Gospel of John. It's the best attempt that I can do. And I think for a book dedicated to the Gospel of John, it is the strongest biblical Unitarian book that has been written up to this particular point. So if people like Kindle, I think it's only for like $9.99. And I don't have perfect 5-star ratings. I think I have 44 is pretty good. 40, I mean, it came out at the end of April.
You have 1 3-star, but the rest is 5. And the 3 stars to a Trinitarian who is like, I don't like it, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, they're very kind. So if you're interested in this understanding of Jewish preexistence and a reading of the Gospel of John that portrays him as thoroughly human and as God as the Father alone, I think this is the strongest argument that's been made in a single volume book dedicated to the Gospel of John. So I look forward to hearing people's feedback.
No, yeah, I think with this, the only negative thing I can say about this is if you thoroughly go through this book, it's like reading the Talmud. It's going to take you a long time to read this just because you have so many notes at the bottom here. So many. So I'm just going to show this one page real quick. Guys, literally a third of the page are all references and notes that you have to go and look up to basically compare where, this is his evidence to everything that he's talking about. It's spectacular. There's so much information here. It's not a super thick book, but it's just jam-packed. It's amazing. It really is. So we will definitely have you on again to go over this. I just can't stop saying enough good things about this. And guys, you know me, I'm honest. If I think it sucks, I'll say it sucks, but it's fantastic. Seriously, you've done a fantastic job on it so far. Seriously, from what I've read, it's you can tell this is just so much reading has had to go into this. It's just I'm sorry. I'm geeking out about it.
That's all right.
So
you're very kind. Thank you.
Well, with that being said, Dr. Dustin Smith, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for taking the time away from the family. We appreciate it. Thank you for coming on. Just kind of talking about biblical Unitarianism, a lot of the arguments for that, and just being honest with the text, with the Bible, and not coming at it from a dogmatic standpoint. Seriously.
Yep. Happy to be here. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
All right. So, until we see you again, shalom, everyone.